Alrighty.
Hey.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to our weekly deep dive podcast. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers Christian Church, and we got a full house here today. I am joined with Noah Randolph, our teaching pastor.
Hello.
We got our special guest here in the studio with us. Some of you may remember her from past deep dives, but we've got Ashley Wakefield here with us.
Hello, how are you all?
And joining us over Zoom, we've got Tom Stolaric also with us again.
Hey, everybody!
Coming back after next week. So we've got a cool roundtable group of people. We are excited about the conversation we're having today. We're going to be kind of discussing the same topic that we were talking about last week, which is the sort of tension that you often get between church members and church leaders when it comes to serving in the church. Who should be serving? Does the church exist to serve the members? Are the members there to serve the church? All of the kind of questions surrounding that. And it's kind of funny. Like I said, this is the same topic we dealt with last week, and we sort of ended it on this note of like, we think we've got a few things figured out, but we have no idea how to make that happen. So we definitely knew it was going to be a two-part episode that was going to take a little bit more thinking through and a little bit more discussing. But before we kind of get into a little bit of that, I wanted to give Ashley a chance here, since she wasn't with us last week. I wanted to give her a chance just here at the beginning, just to start off. Ashley, I don't know if you have any specific thoughts related to this topic. I had kind of given you the heads up on what the general topic was, but I would love to know any thoughts that you've had, any experience you've had with this topic in the church, and just kind of anything you wanted to bring as we get started here.
Yeah, well, as you can see, I went old school and had like all my notes on paper instead of like a computer. But I think going back to what you said before we started the podcast about how, some people feel like the pastor is supposed to do everything. And that kind of, when I thought about service and leaders serving, I thought about, the fivefold ministry with the pastors, teachers, evangelists, prophets, and apostles. And so I didn't know about that when I was growing up, because, when I was growing up, I didn't grow up in church. Like, we would go to church, on holidays and stuff like that. But even when I would go, it was the pastor was in charge of everything. He did everything, and people expected him to do everything. And, you really didn't hear about other titles. Like, you had, people who did other things, but you didn't really think of them as a leader in the churches. Like, if you wanted something, the pastor was supposed to take care of everything. And it wasn't until I went to Abundant Grace where we started learning a little bit more about the different gifts and how to use those to serve in church, or the fivefold ministry and all of that. And so it just kind of shed light on the issue of the pastor is not supposed to take care of everything. Like, there's a reason for different titles for different positions. Yeah. And that kind of reminded me of Moses. I was looking at that chapter where Moses is basically complaining to God that, you've given me all these people as if I've birthed them. And so he's like, this is a heavy burden, because you think about how many Israelites, I think it was like over 600,000 Israelites that came out of Egypt. And so he's had to lead these people by himself, and it was creating too much of a burden. So God ended up picking some elders and taking some of the spirit off of Moses and putting it on them so that they could help bear the burden. And so when I think about that from the leadership perspective, it's that, leaders lead, but they need help to lead. So it's like one person taking care of everything is too much of a burden. So you kind of have to break it up into different groups and put one person in charge of this and so on and so forth, based on their skill set and what they're able or willing to do, so that, so it takes, care of it.
That's such a great point, because just logistically speaking, it really is impossible for one person to do everything. Like it just makes sense. We understand that outside of the church, whenever we are in our jobs and businesses and places that we know you can't have one person doing all of the work. That would just never happen.
Right.
But it is interesting, like you said, a lot of people don't have an awareness of the fact that even in the church, even in the Bible itself, it lists all different types of leadership positions within a church, and lists pastors and teachers and preachers and evangelists, and the assumption kind of from the very beginning is that the work needs to be split up between more than just one person.
Right.
And so that is really good and helpful to remind people that if you have maybe grown up, because what I was saying before we went live is just that I have, especially in previous generations in America, the model that was a lot more common was just one pastor who did everything, and that the job of the church members was to attend, tithe,
Right.
and then let the pastor do his thing. And it's important to mention that the idea of like lots of people pitching in to help is not just something we came up with, but like you're saying, it's in the Bible. There's precedent for it, even going all the way back to Moses. And so that's always really helpful. Sometimes people will bristle up when you're trying to like mention something that's different than what they're used to, and it's always helpful to be like, hey, look, we're not just pulling this out of thin air. It does come out of, there's precedent for it in the past in the Bible. And one of the things last week that Tom mentioned was that he read a passage from Ephesians where it talks about some of those different gifts and the different positions and places that those leaders fulfill in the church. And the passage in Ephesians states that the purpose of those leaders, of the preachers and teachers and evangelists and all, is to equip God's people for service.
Right.
And so I made sure to clarify a little bit. I tried to, at least, that service doesn't just mean in a church Sunday morning setting. Like, service can mean a lot of different things. So one of the best jobs of the leaders is one of the main, I guess the main job of the leaders is to equip the people to serve in a lot of those ways. And that's not something that any one person does. It kind of gets split up by a lot of people. So I like that biblical precedent, for sure. So, but I love that you got prepared, you got your notes, you're ready to go. This is why we've loved having like Tom and Ashley on, because you guys are just so much more like on top of the ball than me and Noah. We're much more fly by the seat of our pants kind of people. So it has been a lot of fun to have people who've actually thought through things rather than just in the moment. So, so you said you had your notes written down. That was one of the first things you thought of. What else came to mind when you were thinking about this?
Well, when you were saying that those different ministries that are basically equipping other people to serve, I think that sometimes when we're thinking about serving, we don't think about serving the body of Christ, which is just one another. Because when we're talking about the church is not just a building, it's the people. Because you can have church without a building. Like, you can be outside and no building, and you can still make it work, because the church is the body of Christ. And so I started thinking about the Lord's Supper, because I remember back in 1 Corinthians, I think it was 1 Corinthians 11, when Paul was criticizing the church in Corinth about how when they were taking part in the Lord's Supper, that what was going on is that you had some people who were basically overindulging in food, overindulging in drinks. And I was looking a little bit more into that, and I know that they said that, back then it may have been customary for people to have it in people's homes. And so when you're having it in someone's homes, they would sit people by their social status. Like, the people who had higher social standing would sit in a different place. People who had more, or sometimes people would bring their own food. And so people who had more money would obviously bring better quality food, and they would bring more of it. And people who had less would bring less food, or less good quality food. And so it became this issue of where the Lord's Supper was creating this distinguishing between social classes, between who had money and who didn't. And Paul was like, that's not the point of the Lord's Supper. And so when I was looking at it, I was trying to find a different version to read it in, but he says, if then anyone takes the bread or the cup of the Lord in the wrong spirit, he will be responsible for the body and the blood. So it was the idea, because I know when people think about Paul criticizing them for that, they think it's about the fact that you haven't repented for something, or the fact that you haven't been baptized. Because I know that I was told that before, before
it's
when
like
I was.
People are always like, if your head's not in the right space and you take communion, then that's violating this verse or something like that.
Exactly. And, and I think when I read it, when I was looking at it, I think that it was more about you not considering the body of Christ, not just the body of Christ himself, because when we're partaking in it, we become part of the body, but it's the idea that it's the body of Christ. It's everyone. And so you're being inconsiderate to the body when you're elevating yourself above someone else by partaking in more food and drink and making other people who have less than that feel less than you. So it's the idea that when we're coming together, we should be in unity. And I think that he goes back let me find that verse where it talks about how if one talks about the less honorable parts, and that's in 1 Corinthians 12:22 and 26, when it talks about there should be no division in the body, but its parts should have equal concern for each other. So if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So it's the idea that we should be serving one another. We should be concerned about the needs of each other. And so we don't come together to elevate ourselves above one another, but to be concerned about the needs of everyone. And I think that's also when he started talking about that's why many of you are sick or dead or dying, is, not just the judgment in itself, but the fact that if someone else is in need of something and that need is like there's a lack of that need, then people die physically, spiritually, when no one cares about what that person needs because there's a lack there. So.
People's needs aren't being met.
Yeah, and I would say to that point, it's interesting. Some of the churches I've grown up in had a huge emphasis on taking care of people outside of the church because they thought that that would be like a witness, right? So you take care of someone that's not a Christian, they're more likely to who's this Jesus you're talking about? And I think they had good intentions behind that, but oftentimes they would not do what you're talking about, which is take care of their own, and they would miss the opportunities to take care of their own in favor of being service-minded outside of the church. And so I think what you're bringing up is a great point of when you're a church-minded and when you're focused on the church, you do need to be focused about the people inside of the church as much as outside of the church, and less thinking about some abstract should I be repenting for this thing, and be thinking, am I doing something in this church body that's offending someone else? Am I drinking too much and this person not being able to drink because they're of a poorer status, And it's funny to me, how many times you would think that a church community would be more considerate of each other within the community, and how many times they weren't, and exactly kind of that Corinthians example, So I think that's a great point.
I love it. I'm getting some feedback from people that your mic is a lot quieter than everybody else's, Noah. So.
I'm trying, guys.
We got the new setup. We're trying to get it all set up here, but the whole time you're talking, Ashley, I'm over here ready to fist pump because that's I love that point. That's been one of my favorite points to make a lot, especially when it comes to the Lord's Supper. Because I think you're spot on. I think he's saying you're not discerning the body, which a lot of people think of as the body and blood in the elements, which I think is a part of what he's saying. But Paul's the king of multiple meanings on meanings. It's the Hebrew thing, and I definitely think you can tell that the heart of his frustration with the Corinthian church is that they're not caring for the needs of the church members. And I know whenever Noah and I were talking about this topic beforehand, that was something that came up a little bit where Noah at least mentioned that he has memories of feeling guilty almost for wanting your own needs met, having the church tell you that we're not here to meet your needs, you're here to serve others or the lost or things like that. And I do know that there's a lot of church people, Christians, people who are already in the church, that have a lot of real needs that are really hurting. And it is a shame that sometimes they don't feel like they are allowed to express those concerns and needs. And it is a shame, like you were saying, that church people don't have it in their mind that a big part of what it means to be the church is to be on the lookout for the needs that other members of the body may have. So, Tom, I know you have, in the past, me and you've talked about this a little bit. We were actually talking about this right before we started the stream, which was interesting too. But both Tom and I come from a church background that heavily emphasizes the importance of the Lord's Supper. A lot of churches we've been a part of, or a lot of churches that other people may have been a part of churches that just do it once a quarter or something like that. You have a Lord's Supper service.
Right.
At least Tom and I are both from churches that really heavily emphasize the importance of having the Lord's Supper every Sunday, believing that that's what the early church did and that was important for all of those reasons that you mentioned before. Have you considered that, Tom, thinking through, from the Restoration Movement background that we're both in, the implications of the Lord's Supper for unity and for like all of the people coming together, and just thoughts about the Lord's Supper in general? Have you thought through those topics more theologically before?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's kind of what it's meant to be, like it's not just about bringing us closer to Christ and remembering his sacrifice, but also remembering that, he did it for us as the body of Christ, right? Not so much for us individually. We like to kind of think of it, I'm saved, me personally, he saved me, but really that's not completely correct, because he saved us, right? He saved us as the body of Christ. And so the whole purpose of us doing it together is to kind of celebrate that as the body of Christ. And so if we're neglecting it, if we're not doing it in the right spirit, then we're kind of missing the whole point of it.
Yeah, that was something I mentioned in my meditation before we had the Lord's Supper a few weeks ago here at Wayfarers. Is, that is like the central ritualistic act that all Christians have done, kind of throughout all history. And I love the fact that it's not something you do by yourself.
Right.
I know, I guess it can be done theoretically, but the idea of you sitting by yourself, partaking in the Lord's Supper, kind of misses the point of what it meant for the early Christians, and I think what Jesus intended for it to mean when he was kind of instituting it. And I think you all are all exactly right that a big part of understanding that is understanding that it is the body, understanding that we are a body. Each part has its role to play. And so that's a really good metaphor to continue to think about it as well. The one that Paul uses, that of the body, and each part having a purpose that it can serve, and a role that it has, some that are more visible, some that are less visible, but everybody is kind of a member of the body. Last week, the big metaphor that we keyed in on was family, and the importance of family, because that was something that was really important to the early church. They thought of each other as members of a family. That's actually what I preached on this last Sunday. Tom got me thinking about it and sparked some ideas, and helped to direct my sermon. And I used the verses about how Jesus says that whoever does the will of God, that is my mother and brothers and sisters. He redefines the family around the church in that way. And what was helpful to me is last week Tom said, when you're in a family, everybody is serving each other, and there's less of that like scorekeeping of like, I did something for you, you do something for me, or you need to do this, I need to do that, but you're doing it for each other out of love. And so I love that as a metaphor. But what we were struggling with was, what does that look like practically? That's like a nice idea, that's a nice theoretical idea, but what does that look like a little bit more practically to really live out the church kind of being a family together? So at least a few of us had the chance to think about that this week, and I'm sure just as we were processing what we had talked about last week, I'd be curious, any one of y'all, do y'all have any ideas of what would be a outworking of if the church started to look like that family a little bit more and helped to serve each other in that way, rather than just the keeping score? I do something for you, you do something for me.
I was kind of thinking about what was said, and I was thinking about what you said about Noah, about how he felt guilty at times about wanting his needs to be met, because I thought about, well, that's family. Like, there's always going to be a need that needs to be met, and the need that someone has to supply. And I thought about how it's a process, and I think that goes back to, we were talking about in Ephesians, where it talks about those different ministries, and it talks about, building up the body of Christ until we attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood. So we're talking about a process. It's not something that just happens as soon as you come, because some people think, okay, well, you're in the building, so mission accomplished. So it's like, well, a process of things that can happen over time, because I know that people have said, you know, at our church before, that church is like a hospital. It's like people come in there because they are sick. And just because you come on a regular basis or you accept Christ does not mean that sickness does not come. Like, you know, life happens. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that life stops happening. You know, people get hit in their health, in their finances, in their relationships, in their marriage, with their children, in their careers. And at some point in time, someone's going to need help. And, you know, you can't, you know, have the attitude that, well, you know God, so you just take care of that yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like this idea that we're together because we all possess different gifts to minister to somebody's need. And so if one person's not able to minister, then that somebody else in the church should be able to minister. And I think that kind of goes to taking care of each other's needs. It's like, if I'm thinking about your needs and then you're taking care of his needs and my needs are being met by Noah, it's like, even though we're not thinking about ourselves, all of our needs are being taken care of because we're not focused solely on ourselves.
That's
because we're
verbatim what he said to me before.
So it's kind of like when everybody's thinking about everybody else, it's like everybody's needs is going to naturally get taken care of. So I think that does come with being sensitive to the Spirit of God, because I think sometimes you can only know certain things if God lets you in on certain things. And then I think also just being concerned enough to ask, you know, because sometimes, like, if you really are concerned, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with calling or texting or saying, hey, like, I haven't heard from you. I haven't seen you in a while. Like, where have you been? What's going on? You know, I think just simple stuff like that with communication can make a really big difference.
Yeah, and I'll give the pushback that I've given to him to you from that point, because it's the thing that I focus on. Is I think that's great ideally, but most people walk in not at that place yet. You know, like they walk in not necessarily so outward focused that they can actually fit that role, you know? And so what do you do when they walk in not ready yet to be other focused? And sometimes they'll walk in, I'm an example of this, they'll walk in so unsure of, untrusting of other people's help, because like one person's help is another person's admonishing, you know, or even sometimes harsh treatment, and that dynamic makes it super difficult in navigating all of that. And so it's not necessarily, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying there's a lot of complications that come that make that ideal of everybody helping one another, like being so other focused, and you just like, or so other focused, someone else is going to take care of you, you're going to take care of someone else. It makes that sometimes fall apart, at least from my experience. I don't know, that's the pushback.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. Because I think about when I first came to Abundant Grace, I was kind of, you know, I was new to the church, so I didn't know who any of them were. And so I kind of just wanted to hang out in the background. I didn't want to, you know, get too close to anyone. And so, you know, when you're opening up to people about certain issues, you don't know what their response is going to be, especially from a Christian point of view, especially from someone who is new to the faith. Like, you don't want to be judged on whatever it is that you did or something that you're experiencing, or if you're a Christian and you're having a lack of faith, you don't want to be judged on that either. And so I do agree with that. I think that just kind of goes back to the process. I think that not to burden someone too much when they're new. If you know that they're, you know, if they're new, not to burden them with too much, because it may be too much for them to handle and you don't want to scare them off. And I think also letting them know that there are people that it's available to talk to them if they're ready to talk. Yeah. And I think that just kind of comes down with relationship and trust. And I think sometimes you have to build up a person's trust. And I think that just comes with time and relationship, and just, you know, being patient with that person and giving them the freedom to come to you, unless for some reason God is just really impressing on you to speak to that person. In that situation, I feel like God will give you the right thing to say and do it in the right manner, so you're not offending them or making them want to, you know, leave. So that's what I would think. So
yeah, that is the freedom that I do think, being open to say you don't have to immediately serve. Yeah, like I have some friends that would probably never say that to anyone, even a new member. Like, as soon as someone just shows up at the church, they just started coming, they would immediately start telling them, you need to be serving. And the problem Noah has brought up is that in an ideal world, it would be awesome if we're all serving each other. We would be all meeting each other's needs. Nobody would have any needs. Everybody would be serving. It's great. But like Noah said, what happens when somebody comes in who has a lot of needs and is maybe not feeling like they are ready to contribute yet, but they just need their needs met. And so it sounds like at Abundant Grace, you felt like you had that freedom to just participate a little bit at the beginning?
Yeah, I really wanted to participate because I had been a member of churches before, because like I said, I didn't grow up in the church.
Right.
And I had joined before, but I really wasn't a part of ministry. I would just come and then hear the sermon and then just leave at the end of the sermon. I really didn't participate in ministry. And so I was excited at the thought of participating, but I really wasn't aware of what my gifts were.
Right.
I was just willing to participate. And that may be an issue for some people. They may not know how I can serve.
Right.
Or they may be certain gifts that a person has that somebody else may recognize in them and they haven't realized it.
Yeah.
Because there's certain gifts that I didn't know that I had until
someone else
Yeah,
told
until
you.
someone saw it and
Oh,
it
yeah,
was
me
like,
too.
yeah, you need to get into that. You need to do that more. And I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know that about myself when I first came here.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes letting that person see that in themselves, because they may not see that, and that in itself may be too much. Like somebody may have a calling in their life to be a pastor or to be a teacher, and that may come across as intimidating because they never thought about that before. And so I think giving them the freedom to realize that themselves may be good, instead of, pressuring that. Just pinpoint it out and then just give it time to marinate, and then they'll eventually figure it out as long as they stay in it. But when we were talking, I thought about something else, and it just kind of came to me. But speaking of needs in the church, I thought about the issue of people taking advantage, because I know that's happened in our church, where I've heard other people say that, someone came in, they didn't have a car, and so, we were willing to drive them to this place and that place. And so it got to a point where they could tell they were kind of taking advantage of the service, where they were just like calling them up for any and everything. And they were just kind of like, okay, well, we want to help, but we don't want to just like constantly give handouts or be taken advantage of. And they got upset and left. And so there's that issue too, where people will come to church because they know it's charitable, and they'll take advantage of the charity, and then when they get what they want, they will leave, which is like the dark side of that. But it was just something
which
that
I'm
came to
sure
It definitely happens.
yeah, I'm sure that's some of the guilt tripping you may have felt from church leaders in the past growing up. I'm sure for some of them, in the back of their mind,
They experienced that
they
probably.
experienced people who came in and took advantage of them a little bit in that way.
Which you've had some thoughts on. And I think even you too, Tom, have had thoughts on like the idea of the church being okay with being taken advantage of, even, and like the ministry of Christ almost representing the biggest case of being taken advantage of.
Yeah. Have you, before I could talk about that
Okay.
for a while for sure. have you thought about that issue before, Tom? Or should we even be?
It's always one of
keeping
those
score?
things, you hear people saying, oh, you shouldn't give to, people like that are standing on the side of the road or something like that. They have the CNN special that they've seen that, talks about this person that's really a con man that's, dressing all dirty just to get handouts and stuff. Or maybe they're going to use that money. I think to a certain degree, like that's not really on us. Like I think we are called to give. We are called to help those in need. There's going to be times when you're taken advantage of. I mean, that's going to happen. But I also don't think that means we shouldn't use wisdom. I think there's going to be times when we need to exercise wisdom in how we are helping those that come, because giving a handout or just always acquiescing to whatever they ask for isn't always going to be the best thing for them. You figure, just like if we go back to our family analogy, not everything your child asks for you're going to give them, right? Because that's not necessarily going to be good for them. So you have to exercise wisdom in that, in discipling. I think the idea of discipling is kind of the direction we're going with this, and so what needs are you fulfilling? Are those things going to help them to grow in Christ? Are they going to help them to develop? Or are you just giving them whatever it is they're asking for,
Yeah.
I think the hard thing is that I know a lot of people that would think they're using wisdom in situations like that, but really they're just using skepticism. And
there's definitely a difference between those.
yeah, there's definitely a difference between having a mindset from the start that you think this person is
Right.
not gonna be good, you
Right.
know, and having a mentality that's very unbiased, that looks at the situation and can judge it straight based off of what they see, you know.
Right. Are
and
you judging
that's
based off of the color of their skin, off of what they're wearing, how
Right.
they're speaking?
right.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that, you know, needs to be rooted out. And unfortunately, I've seen that myself, you know, church members kind of being judgmental in that way. And I think that all goes back to, you know, are we, as leaders in the church, are we equipping the saints for the work of service? You know, like those that are new that come in, yeah, they're not going to be ready. They're not going to be equipped to help others because they haven't been equipped yet. You know, it's going to take time to equip them. It's a process. So, yeah, of course, you're going to have people that come in that are going to have more needs than, you know, their ability to serve. But the whole idea is that as they come, their needs will be met and they will also be equipped to be able to serve others.
Yeah. And so the I love all the different ways that the analogy of family really does help to bring things together, because that is a good point you made, Tom. I want to reemphasize that if you give your child everything that they want, you're not actually helping them any.
Right.
And so sometimes one of the best things we can be doing in the church is sort of finding that line between when to serve people's needs and when to kind of help push them into positions where they can grow a little bit more and not just have all of their kind of own needs met.
The hard part with that, I'll speak the elephant in the room here, is that I think most members that come to a church think they're the ones in power. So if you go too far in something, they're out, you know, like it's not as if they see you as like, you know, someone, it's not as if they see you as a family member that like will always be tied to them. It's, you know, if you go too far, I can leave, you know, and that's always in the back of everybody's head, you know?
Yeah.
And so that dynamic is harder to work with because you can push too far and they leave, you know? And so you as a church leader have to be really careful like about that, or maybe you don't. Maybe you should just say what you say and, you know, let the cards fall as they may. I don't know. Like, I think that's the hard question that every pastor has to ask.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on one of the key differences between the New Testament times and our time now. We've mentioned a few passages in 1 Corinthians already, and there's a difficult passage in 1 Corinthians where a man is actually kicked out of the church for sleeping with a stepmother and engaging in sexual behavior that is sinful unrepentantly. And I know that when that passage has come up, when I've talked about it with people in other churches, they talk about how difficult it is to do the same thing they did then, now, because for basically every sin, you can pretty much find a church that's like, no, that's fine. That's fine. Just come over here. We don't care. We don't care about that. Just come over here and do that. Whereas in the first century, where else are you going to go? Like that was like there was one church in town. That was the church, you know. And the idea of having somewhere else to go.
Well, it might not even
something that people have.
finding a church that's okay with it. You could just go to another church and they don't even know about it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's true. That's one of the issues that's come up a lot in like sexual abuse situations in churches lately, has been that people will like repeat over and over and over again, repeat offenders, because they just go to a different church that has no idea about anything that happened at the previous church. So the many options of churches to choose from is definitely one of the biggest obstacles to really being to really making that family dynamic a reality.
Because I can choose who my family is at any point in time.
And I know that I read a really good Twitter thread from a pastor one time that talked about how so many church members don't realize that when they just leave, you know, it's like, I'm done, I'm going somewhere else. Especially for the church leaders, how much that hurts them. For you, it's just like a logical decision you're making. You don't even think about it. But especially for church leaders who maybe have a little bit more of that familial aspect to what it is that they're trying to do.
Yes. I can definitely testify to that.
Yeah. feels like a family member is leaving you, not like
It's really difficult not to take it personally. It's really
It's like somebody saying, well, I don't want to be family with you anymore, and just like cutting you off and never seeing you again. Because I know our pastor, he did a teaching on that once where he talked about, people talk about church hurt, like in church hurt is usually referring to the people on the pews about how somebody said something or did something that offended them, but people don't really talk about how pastors or leaders of the church get hurt by people leaving when you're trying to, help them or form relationships and bring them in. And I know that, what I've heard from Garrett, because I know that Pastor Hunt has talked to Garrett about, relationships among members and tensions. And I know he said that, you really can't, kick someone out. And I know that, he's dealt with that. And because I know that Pastor Hunt has dealt with people, leaving the church. And I know that in our ministry in particular, without, getting too deep in it, I know we recently had a member leave because of some tensions. And I think that the advice that he gave Garrett was just like, you can't really kick someone out. You just kind of have to give them the freedom to leave on their own, but not, tell them you have to leave. Because I know that, things can happen. And then, you don't really know how to handle the situation. And the best thing to do is just because you don't want to create a culture of, if you do something wrong, we're going to cut you off. And I think that you kind of present, because I think that kind of reminds me of judgment, kind of judging the body. I think that, the Bible talks about how we don't judge the world, but we judge each other.
Right.
And so we all have the Spirit of God. So we're judging each other by the Spirit. So we're holding each other accountable and saying that, hey, when you're saying this, when you're doing this, that's not lining up with who you're supposed to be. And of course, you speak that into their life in love. And, sometimes that doesn't always go well. Sometimes people get offended, whatever happens. And then you don't kick them out, but if they decide to leave, that has to be their personal choice, because we don't want to create this atmosphere where we're just going to cut everybody off and kick them out. And so that can be kind of tricky. But
Yeah, the dynamics of it are definitely different for a lot of different reasons, and that's why I like what Tom was saying about it. Just take some wisdom in general. I feel like that's our go-to answer. Me and Noah always come back to with a lot of things. Take
have
some
wisdom. That's just
it's real easy.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
There are 4 books in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that are specifically answering how to be wise. So, I mean, there's a lot to read there. It's not just like we say be wise, but like what we're really saying is go read Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Job, and Ecclesiastes, because that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. And the other thing I think too is that you've hinted at this already a little bit, Ashley, but sometimes wisdom involves knowing when to listen to other people.
yeah.
I felt the same way as you. Some of the things that I'm gifted at, I would have had no idea unless someone else in the church had pointed them out to me. Have you had experiences like that, Noah, having other people point out things that?
Yeah. Like you talking like moral things or
No, like spiritual gifting. And things like that.
Spiritual gifting. Yeah.
People pointing out talents and things that you had that you didn't know.
I grew up in a Baptist church, so the Spirit was not really talked about a lot.
Yeah, that is true. I have to admit, because I've been to Baptist, because I was a member of my grandmother's church. It was a Baptist church, and the Spirit definitely does not rule very heavily. So we don't talk about it a lot, and there's
In the same context.
Yeah.
And so, what about you, Tom? Did you have other people speak into your life and help affirm the talents and abilities that you had?
Oh yeah, definitely. I never thought I'd be a preacher, honestly. Like that wasn't ever something that I was looking to do or thought I would ever be able to do. But when I was in Bible college, I had a few different people, kind of bring that up to me and kind of point that out. So I think, that definitely helped me.
Yeah, and so that's, the positive sense. You were hinting at a little bit there too, Noah. Sometimes listening to other people can be in a more difficult sense, where sometimes people will point out shortcomings and flaws in you that you didn't even notice before. But the point I'm kind of making in general sometimes is we don't always have to have it figured out ourselves. And that's one of the benefits of having a group of people and the sort of wisdom that can come about from a group of people. So some person may have had a little bit more experience, a little bit more time, a little bit more wisdom in one area, so they're going to be a little bit better at pointing out certain things in that area that you need, even particular spiritual gifting that makes them more discerning in that area. Whereas they may not be the expert on a different area of your life that you might need help with, or that you might need.
Yeah.
And so the real benefit of having lots of people, and I guess on top of that too, like an open environment where you feel like you're willing to listen and hear those things from other people, is really good. Because one of the things I thought of when you were talking earlier, Ashley, was that another thing that's important when we have needs, is also having the humility ourselves to admit the needs that we may have.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the other issues we have sometimes in the church is that we pretend that we don't have problems. And so the church can't solve your problems because you haven't even told anyone that you have them.
Tom mentioned that.
Yeah. I'm
And
guilty of that.
Oh, yeah. I think we all are, for sure.
Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of the way that we kind of set up, our church services, the way we interact with each other isn't always very conducive for being able to share that things that are like, kind of more personal, that are requiring us to be vulnerable, It would be very kind of intimidating to just when are you supposed to do that during a church service,
And I will say, in the churches I have grown up in, I don't know about y'all, but gossip as a thing in churches is awful.
Absolutely.
It's just awful. It's not like, if there's number one, like, what pastors need to be preaching about, it's just like, don't talk about other people's crap, because a lot of people in churches do. And
like you were
like,
talking
I
about,
don't think they realize, the people that are gossiping, one, I don't think they realize they're doing it. And two, I don't think they realize that is communicating to literally everybody else that's hearing that my secrets are not safe, And
Right.
so, heck no, I'm not going to tell anybody in this church like what I'm dealing with, because I know it's going to go everywhere, and it's
everything's
like,
fine. Everything's great.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest about that. I know I've had that happen before, where someone was saying something to me that was very personal, but they were saying it to me in front of someone else that I did not want them to know.
Yeah, you don't want to.
And so it was just so embarrassing and off-putting, and it was just kind of like, why would you say that? It's like, and I feel like that it's just knowing what to say, when to say it, and who to say it to.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and I think that comes with, with prophecy and information, because sometimes God gives you information not to spread it to other people, but to pull that person aside to talk to them about it personally, or sometimes just to pray about it in your private time. And I think that understanding the level of discretion where you're dealing with other people's secrets, because secrets can hurt people, they can embarrass people, they can offend people, they can make people want to leave church. And so it's just a matter. And I think that sometimes people feel like, we're all family, so it doesn't matter. But even amongst family, there may be one person you feel more comfortable sharing certain things with that you don't feel comfortable saying to someone else,
Definitely.
And so I think that definitely taking that into consideration is that you have to be mindful about what you're saying. Like, be mindful of your words, because you could easily say the wrong thing to the wrong person, and then it becomes this whole thing in the church, and now everybody's talking about gossiping about whatever, know. So you have to be careful not to ruin somebody else's reputation, or to not hurt them or offend them, because at that point it's about helping them and helping them heal, and not hurting them.
Right.
And so you're just making the process so much worse.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of hearing three things here that are barriers in it a little bit. One is what you were saying, Tom, the the structure of our church services makes it kind of awkward to have that level of intimacy with anybody, period. Because,
Yeah.
like, what are you supposed to do? Like, hey, Noah, how are you doing? I'm doing pretty good, man. How about you? Oh, I just lost my job, and my wife is cheating on me. And,
As an Enneagram 4, I'm like kind of the
You're the
rebel.
Yeah.
I have purposely said awful to someone and just watched them squirm.
just watch them get super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, I'm doing awful. And so, yeah, the
But
way
I mean,
we've
there's
set
not
our
even
churches
like,
up
even
is
if somebody said that to me, so like, we have our service, and before we actually get started, I'm usually walking around and talking to people and, just ask them how they're doing, things like that. And if someone did that, I'm like, I don't even have the time in that moment to even get into it. I mean, we're about to start our service.
Yep.
People are coming in. We got, all kinds of things to get going. So it's just not even an opportune time to talk about that. And obviously I can try to, set up a time to talk with them later. And that's what I would do in that situation. But yeah, it's just not really conducive for that. I think there needs to be something more, I think just having a church service, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, I think we need to have those worship services, but there needs to be more, there needs to be other opportunities for people to develop relationships with each other, to grow, to be able to minister to each other and to be ministered to. It can't all happen just in that 1 or 2 hours on Sunday
Absolutely.
morning.
Yeah, quick shout out to Garrett. He's watching here with us. He just commented on the stream. You mentioned him just a second ago, but Garrett was pointing out that is why we need to be thinking about other structures. Garrett's talking about small groups and other things like that.
Right.
Where being able to minister to people in those ways is something that ends up being really conducive to maybe avoiding some of those issues that we have just in our structures. But on top of the structures, like you were saying, it's not just that the structures themselves make it a little bit hard to have those familiar relationships, but it's also what you were saying, Noah, like sometimes you don't want to share things with people because that's just giving them ammunition.
Right, exactly.
And like you were saying, Ashley, those secrets are powerful things, and unfortunately in the church sometimes people will leverage that in really hurtful ways against other people.
Well, and
sometimes it's not even on purpose, like you're saying. They don't even
Right.
realize.
they
they're
don't even
gossiping.
realize. And you'd be surprised how much. This is a kind of separate, but still the same. You'd be surprised how much one person pretending to be great at the whole Christian life thing will ruin everybody else's feeling of wanting to be vulnerable. Like if you have one person in the group of 12 people that just thinks that they're knocking it out of the park living a Christian life, and talks about it all the time, the other 11 are going to be far less likely to open up about their own personal struggles because they're looking at that guy and it's like, oh, he's doing great, it becomes a source of shame even internally that becomes really hard to deal with, so that's the difference of think about AA clubs, AA meetings and things like that. The first thing they do is they make everybody admit that they're all in the same place, and that's what makes it work, is that without that, you're constantly left wondering, is this person in a better place than I am? And is he going to judge me for being in my place? And, it's just this constant anxiety that's there where you don't actually feel like you're on a level playing field, and I think that leads to a lot of it too. So, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up that issue of how admitting that we're all in the same place, because even if we're not all necessarily in the same place, I think that we've been to a place that's similar to what that person is in, because we go through different phases in our life. Because I know that I've also been in situations where everybody else is talking about a specific topic and I may not be where I want to be and where we're in whatever topic we're discussing, but everybody else would be like, oh yeah, I got this going on, I got this, I got that, and I'm doing good. And everybody's like, oh yeah, amen, hallelujah type stuff going on. And I'm just like, I'm not doing well in that area. And so I don't want to say that because I don't want to be the only person in the group who's not doing well. And then everybody else is like, well, why aren't you doing well? How come you don't do something about it? How come you don't do this? How come you don't do that? Like, what's the problem? So you start to think you start to feel like it's my issue and it's only something that I'm experiencing. And so you internalize it so that you don't have to express it because you feel like they wouldn't understand. So
yeah. So it's the other kind of barrier that I'm hearing a little bit there too is just that for there to be healthy vulnerability, you need to have some vulnerability and some honesty yourself. So if you're on it, you can't expect other people to be truthful if you're not being truthful about your own situations and areas. So sometimes that doesn't.
Yeah.
The perfect Christian doesn't mean you have to like pretend that. Like sometimes maybe you are doing better. Like God has helped me in a lot of things, and I really have accomplished success in overcoming certain areas of my life. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm like still.
No.
But the honesty of acknowledging that it's through the power of God that it's happened. It's not just like I'm better than you. That's and it's not that I'm perfect and don't have plenty of other areas that I still need to work on. But just having that truth and that vulnerability from our part could help to open things up a little bit more for everybody else.
Well, and it's grace, really, at the end of the day. I'm amazed at how much we talk about grace from the pulpit, but don't use it with each other. You know, like it's like if you really sat and asked yourself, like, how much grace am I having in my small group right now? You know, and really like.
And by grace, you mean
like just like
like graciousness that you're showing.
Graciousness, kindness, mercy,
showing them mercy,
you know,
forgiving
like,
them for
that. Am I looking at them as someone that has a bunch of problems that we need to work through, and never asking the question, like, but they were better than they were yesterday, you know, or thinking about that, or thinking about like, you know, where they might be at in life and empathizing with their situation right now. You know, like there are so many things that you can find in people that are beautiful and like that are strengths, not weaknesses, you know, and this is why I sometimes don't like the analogy of a church being a hospital, is because a hospital only focuses on the negatives, what's wrong, you know? And so everybody goes in and you feel like you're only being criticized because they're all trying to fix what's wrong with you when they're never talking about what's right with you, right? You know, and they're never like speaking into your life about this is awesome, you know, and they're not like uplifting the parts of you that are right. And that's where I think, you know, the church could learn is you're not just a hospital, you're also an encourager. You're also like a stabilizer, you know, like you're building the things that you do see that are good in them, and you're bringing those out and you're speaking those to them about those. And so I think that's kind of the other side of the coin, if it will, you know, definitely. About that.
No, that's really, the analogy being a hospital focuses on healing what's wrong with you.
Right.
But like even in healthcare, in the healthcare world recently, there's been a big emphasis on preventative medicine, which is stuff that you do to avoid getting sick in the first place, being healthier, being, you know, different things like that. And maybe that could be a part of it too. And then another part of the analogy could just be pointing out, you know, the things that are already great about you and you're already doing really well, and the graces God has already shown you and the ways he's already helped grow you. And so all of those different ideas can really help to grow maybe that more authentic community that could start to better serve the needs. So unfortunately we're out of time. We've been talking about trying to do this more regularly, so we'll talk about it a little bit more as soon as we're done off the stream here. But I think we're going to be starting to bring on Tom more regularly, and if you're down for it, Ashley, we would love to start having you on more regularly too.
Oh yeah, I'm like, we didn't even get into like the topic I really wanted to talk about.
We barely just started. Ashley has a great some great ideas related to tithing that relates to this topic.
Yeah,
I do want to get into.
Sadly.
We didn't even get to.
I mean, we could
that.
just make a next episode about that.
So we'll deal with that soon. It'll just be a teaser. You got to tune in to hear a little bit more about how that relates and some of the things Ashley specifically wanted to talk about.
I was like, yeah, please have me on for tithing because I have like some strong opinions about that.
All right, so we will do that. We'll bring you back on. So everybody's watching, if you or listening, if you want to hear that, you got to tune back in, hear a little bit more about what Ashley wanted to talk about. But I guess we've thrown out a whole bunch of little things in there. Hopefully they're different things as people are listening, and that they could spark some ideas for you about what the church could be. But I think a lot of the basic summaries of what we're saying is that the eventual goal is for the church communities that we're a part of to be fully healthy as communities that aren't aren't unhealthy in the ways of like gossip and of hurting other people and things like that. They aren't unhealthy in the ways of like everyone there just needs stuff and isn't there to also help other people. I thought of the family analogy, especially that like there are a lot of unhealthy families out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of families out there where it's only the mom that helps everybody else and everybody else just smooches off of her. There's a lot of families where the mom only will help if you also do stuff for her. And so a lot of the analogies I think we're hearing and a lot of the difficulties we've seen in the church is that we have versions of these families, of these bodies, but they are unhealthy families. They're dysfunctional families, or they are unhealthy bodies as well. And so you can't do it all at once, but maybe one of the best things that we can do in our church communities is just to systematically, one by one, start figuring out what are the areas of unhealth that need to be resolved. And the real nice part of that is that as you start to deal with those issues and maybe help to create communities that don't have some of those same unhealthy areas like others do, I do think it becomes a little more natural that people's needs are being met. You have a little bit less of this back and forth between the leaders and the church members. You have more natural and organic opportunities come up for people's needs to be met. And I think that's the real goal. No one wants to have to like force things like this to happen.
Right.
And one of the real goals would be if our church communities could get to a healthy place where some of these needs could start to be met in real natural and organic ways. So that's definitely my prayer. I know that that's a lot of similar to the prayer that we all have for our different churches. So just like last week, we haven't figured it all out yet. Again, but that's just more reason you guys have to keep tuning in. You gotta tune in.
We
a little
did give
bit
some
more.
helpful things. Don't gossip,
Yeah.
Don't try and brag about your good deeds in a whole group, those types of things.
Be a little more vulnerable if you can, if you're able to.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Tom was talking about think about the structures themselves, maybe small groups, maybe some other things that we could be doing that could help us think about it. So we threw a few things out there, but we haven't solved it all yet. You guys just got to keep tuning in, hear us discuss it a little bit more. Hopefully, share some of your ideas with us too. We would love to hear that. So, shout out to Garrett that was watching with us, commenting on the stream. Any of you who watch live, we would love to see your comments come in through as we kind of continue to discuss things. And if you're listening to this podcast later, we would also love to hear from you. You can find contact info for all of us on our website, and so we would love to hear any thoughts that you guys have as you listen along or questions that you might have as we go forward in the future. Besides that, I would encourage any of you to tune in with us this Sunday at 7 o'clock for our church stream, and if not then, we will just see you next week on Wednesday evening for our weekly Deep Dive podcast. Thanks so much to all of you guys for joining us for this roundtable, and thanks to everybody that was tuning in and listening.
It's square.
It's square table.
All right. Thank you guys for having me.
All right. We'll see y'all next week.
Thanks, guys.